There are two ways to adapt a character. You either keep the name and reimagine the rest, or you stay mostly faithful to the source material and add a few bits and bobs on top of that. And while both approaches are valid, for every reimagining that works, you get a half dozen that don't. So I'm pleased to report that The Batman goes for the latter, more sensible approach. It's like tuning your car. You can slap some side skirts, a spoiler, and turbo on your Japanese import, or you can surgically attach 66-inch tires and a bazooka. Not saying they're not both fun, but one just makes more sense than the other making the vehicle's manufacturers sigh despondently because they didn't design the car for that sort of thing. And where was I going with this? Ah yes, Batman. Let's skip past the pleasantries, shall we? I think this is the best looking live-action Batman I've ever seen, which is ironic considering that I wasn't sold on this look after the first teaser. I'm specifically talking about the way the cowl meshes with the eyes, as well as Pattinson's acting, the way he's shot, the lighting, all of it comes together to form an almost sensual performance. He's so real, especially on the big screen. You get the sense that he's an actual believable creature of the night, standing there looking at you with a stoned expression and a bit of an erection. And by the old gods, this movie looks good. I don't want to sound like the pretentious film school twat that I assuredly am not, but the Batman manages to flex on other darkly lit affairs as well as high-profile cases like Dune by showing that you can have a film look both dark and colorful, artsy and pragmatic. Gotham is its own tangible character, brought to life by splendid architecture, grungy costumes, compelling cinematography comprised of narrow, blurry, ultra-playing with the focus, oppressive, suffocating, mysterious, and ominous shots. How's that for film school philology? And defibrillated to life by the anxiety-provoking, cortisol-raising score that requires about 3 Valiums afterwards to get your blood pressure down. They should be serving this stuff like complimentary candy right next to the popcorn maker. In a sense, Pattinson's bringing it back to basics, which I'm all on board for. No false chord screams or fancy voice modulators here. Save those for the rogues gallery. He somehow manages to both do detective work and thus talk a lot, but also come across as the silent type at the same time. And even in the way he interacts with other characters, Batman has never felt more real on screen. Compared to something like, say, Christopher Nolan's trilogy, where cops and lawyers seem right at home around him, like they're walking past the graveyard shift dude or the janitor, here they find it rather difficult to carry out their duties with a 6'1" plus bat ears Phantom of the Opera type in the room, which I think is a more appropriate response. And make no mistake, this is a noob bat. A bat that's still rough around the edges, takes a beating every now and then, and still has a bit of a fear of heights. They treat Batman with real majesty. Every glance, every pose, it all feels so larger than life and so bloody authentic, and it makes everything more believable as a result. I can see why Selina would find this tall, dark, and creepy stalker kinda hot. I can understand why, by the book, Gordon would make exceptions to the rules for this weirdo time and again, because in the 2 years since he appeared on the scene, he's never once slipped nor showed any signs of corruption, which isn't something he can say about his fellow cops or Gotham's elite. He literally has no one else to turn to, no one else he can trust in this cesspool of a city, and that makes their relationship all the more believable. And with regards to Catwoman, it's not just about looks and winks. The movie delves deeper than the superficial and works hard to give Batman and Catwoman a reason to like one another, whereas past versions tend to stick to the shallow, obvious similarities. You wear latex, I wear latex, you animal, me animal. We'll bang, okay? The Batman has that for sure, but it also works to make the characters themselves kindred spirits. Their backgrounds, their personalities, their histories, what they've been through. Beneath his aloof, guarded persona, Batman sympathizes with Selina quite a bit and sees quite a bit of himself in her. Not quite what I had in mind, but that works too. And for her part, Kyle doesn't really know much about the Broodbot 5000, but gets enough hints about the kind of pain that hides under the mask to realize that they're not all that dissimilar. In terms of screen time, it really seems like we see more Batman than Bruce Wayne, at least during the first act, if not through the whole movie. I'm actually curious to test this, and this emphasizes that Bruce Wayne is losing himself within this persona he's created to the point where we scarcely see the man without the mask. And that, along with other choices that Reeves and Pattinson make, help to sell the character. Any person who's deranged, driven, and desperate enough to, against all alternatives and common sense, dress up like a bat and clean up the streets of crime one thug at a time needs to look and act a certain way. And Pattinson realized this early on, which is why his Batman looks singularly, unhealthily driven, and why his Bruce Wayne looks completely drained, consumed by his desperate need to make his shitty career choice work. For all its merits, the Dark Knight trilogy didn't have this. Bale's Batman was cool and all, but fairly neutral, while his Bruce Wayne, despite having his moments of pain and vulnerability, came across as kind of collected and well put together, almost carefree, which is not a knock on it by any stretch. I appreciate both interpretations, but Pattinson's version is the more believable one, the one that actually looks and acts like a guy guy who's moonlighting as a freelance detective in thug disposal unit, hates sunlight and gets depressed whenever he has to go outside during the daytime. Basically me when I go to the convenience store. This is what being true to the source material while adding one's own spin on top looks like. This version of Bruce is completely drained, consumed by his quest, disinterested in the real world, utterly sleep-deprived, and deeply scarred. And Pattinson plays that beautifully. Every glance, gesture, and mannerism communicates this. Full disclosure, I quite enjoy BVS Batman, imperfect as he is. As far as Elseworlds interpretations go, he's not bad. But this movie elegantly explains why Batman shouldn't kill, or perhaps why the better interpretations tend not to. This is a never-ending debate, of course, with no-kill proponents constantly trying to find new ways to articulate the importance of that tenet with varying degrees of success. After all, Iron Man kills, Thor kills, Blade kills, lots of superheroes kill, so why is Batman exempt? Yes, he is scarred by his trauma and he does value life above all else, but it's not just about him, it's about his city. Gotham is a hotbed of corruption. If it were a real place, it would dwarf the seediest, most putrid criminal underbellies of the world combined without breaking a sweat. Its citizens are jaded to the extreme. Why should they follow a vigilante who thinks he's above the law and solves problems with the business end of a Desert Eagle? Why would Gordon trust someone who isn't willing to respect the vows that he himself swore to uphold? Saving Gotham isn't as simple as punching up criminals. New criminals emerge every day, whether out of poverty, greed, or desperation. It's more complicated than that. Saving Gotham has more to do with inspiring its people, inspiring them to be better, to do better, to not give in to their basest impulses, to dare to live as if better days are coming. All things I never once tried but read about in a book somewhere. Batman, more than any other hero, is about hope. Flying in, guns blazing, and killing every goon, psycho, and corrupt official wouldn't work in Gotham. It would make it that much more cynical. These are the themes of the Batman. This is the issue that it chooses to tackle. Everything is built from the ground up to support it, and the movie shines because of it. Combat starts off pretty good, continues with pretty damn good, and climaxes with pretty damn good, lads! While still keeping it at street level without any needless explosives or over-the-top gadgets. I was somewhat worried that the hand-to-hand stuff would be a little bit stiff, as is usually the case in basically all Bat fights except that one warehouse scene, but it's pretty fucking fluid. Both the Bat and the Cat have quite a lot of freedom of movement, which both allows them to fight pretty much unencumbered and goes well with the functional, somewhat unpolished style they were going for. Skip the neons and spinning rings, we have a job to do here. So even if you're a bit unenthused by the costumes and the visual style, you can at least appreciate that the result is outfits that allow you to play Twister without tearing the fabric in all the wrong places. There's also the car chase sequence, which didn't impress me much when I saw it in the trailer. Little did I know that that was just the tail end of a brilliantly executed highway race, which looks exhilaratingly real, probably because it is real, with some stunning stunts and deft driving. And once again, the camera work makes the whole thing feel suffocating. The Batmobile is treated like a predator that's hungry for blood, and there are a lot of twists and obstacles along the way, such that when you reach that final shot of the Batmobile jumping out of the flames, you really get the sense that this is some sort of ghost car relentlessly pursuing its prey to the ends of the earth. Ends of the earth! Basically a Jason driving a monster truck. The supporting cast overall is well implemented. Gordon gets a lot of screen time, and Catwoman actually gets her own arc, instead of just being the cute-looking sidekick that takes down a couple extra goons. Her and Batman get quite a bit of scenery to chew on, and they found some creative scenes for them to interact with one another in, and overall she's tied quite nicely into the story. Speaking of tied to the story, Bruce too is weaved pretty nicely into the whole thing, as partially spoiled by the trailers. Trailers are the scum of the earth, by the way. And Paul Dano does not disappoint. His Riddler is smart, cool, collected, and totally unhinged. I like how in the beginning everyone's scrambling to capture him, but halfway through you almost forget he even existed because you're too busy dealing with the massive conspiracy he just exposed, which is exactly what this kind of villain is supposed to do, use evil to expose a greater evil. Dano does this thing where he sounds like a frightfully intelligent guy that knows what he's talking about and that you could have an open-minded conversation about global warming with, and it's only when you see him up close, unmasked and unabashed, that you realize that he's fucking autistic, and not the fun kind. Top-notch performance. And Alfred, wonderful interpretation by Serkis. Wish there was more of him though. The good news is that what is there is preciously important to the tale, and leads to one of the film's more emotional moments. In terms of how he plays the character, Andy goes for a sterner Alfred than we've seen in the past, one that doesn't take as much shit from his master as previous incarnations, or at least isn't as chipper about it. We've seen the doting grandpa Alfred, we've seen jaded uncle Alfred, we've seen Dumbledore Alfred, and now we get former Spec Ops Alfred Alfred, who taught Bruce how to fight, serves his tea but also smacks him over the bulb if he spills it. And even John Turturro gets more screen time than I expected and is a perfect fit to play Falcone. I'd say Batman Begins as Maroni is a tad more compelling, but Falcone's no slouch either. He perfectly demonstrates what happens when you give one man too much power for too long. And the movie's pretty much airtight on the humor front too, for it does not try to force a joke pretty much at all. And what levity there is happens completely organically as a consequence, which is a crucial thing to understand because too much humor can ruin a movie like this, while having absolutely zero levity will turn it into a dreary, joyless experience that'll make you want to OD on chocolate afterwards, or hurt yourself. And in case the teasers and the trailers and the synopsis and the weird symbols on the bottom of your coffee cup didn't make it obvious, this is the most noir movie you will see all year. It oozes noir out of all its pores. As such, it has the balls to be a little unsettling, so if you're still a bit squeamish about transitioning from duck TV to live action, fair warning. Speaking of birds, I have to bring it back to the penguin because I feel like Colin Farrell is the unsung hero of this flick. How one goes from sexy Irish dude to deformed crime boss with a compelling accent to boot is beyond me. Farrell really inhabits this character well, and I was just as bewildered watching the movie as I was the promo material. Those prosthetics are absolutely surreal. I didn't fucking recognize him. At any rate, my one expectation has been satisfied. This is indeed a detective story, and a pretty good one at that. It does exactly what it's supposed to do, keeping you guessing and wondering until the end. And even when the mysteries have mostly been figured out, the movie still finds things to make you guess and gasp about, and this, coupled with the fact that it's almost 3 hours long, is why I urge you to see it under optimal conditions lest you ruin the first viewing experience, which is quite important when it comes to this kind of guessing game story and which you don't really get a second chance at. Don't go for the late night screening at the tail end of your most stressful day of the week. Your attention might wane, not least of which because this movie feels like it has 3 climaxes. Yes, I knew you'd like that one. Some big thing happens and you're like, well, movie's over. Except no, it isn't. We still haven't dealt with enemy number 2, which, here it comes, ready or not. Okay, now we're done. Nope, here's the bonus secret level. Hope you have enough hit points left for the final boss. Speaking of, I was wondering how they were going to tie it back to Bats in the end, because at the end of the day, this needs to be his story. He needs to inspire, to save, to protect, to win the people over, and based on how the first 3/4 of the movie went, you wouldn't think Bruce would be winning over very many friends. But they actually managed to tie things up nicely in the last second, which I suppose it would have been pretty embarrassing to not stick the landing after inexplicably getting the green light from the studio to make a 2 hour and 47-minute movie. At least they saved us the trouble of the director's cut. This is the bloody director's cut. There's a certain scene near the end teasing a certain character for a follow-up movie, and I admit I kind of wanted them not to do that on some level, simply because we've had our fill of that character quite a bit, and there are plenty others they could have reached for from the comics that are grossly underserviced. On the other hand, I can say that it didn't wet my defunct cobweb-infested dopamine center, so I guess it was effective enough. And after seeing what Reeves did with this film, I'd trust him with pretty much any character. He'd make fucking Calendar Man into a badass, or Firefly. Okay, let's not go overboard here. Speaking of lame, this is as good a time as any to talk about the negatives. Batman eats bullets the way a teenage girl eats Haagen-Dazs after a breakup, and while I give it a pass on account of it looking cool and leading to some creative scenes, try doing that in real life, armor and all, without losing your ability to breathe. Some people will complain that no one thought to hit the face, which of course I'd argue they did, and that the bullets just bounced off of his titanium-reinforced jawline sculpted by geometry itself. Still, a modicum of suspension of disbelief is required. Also, I'm sure I had some notes here. Well, it can be hard to follow at times, you know, if your third brain cell is in maintenance. There are a lot of names thrown around, and some characters like Maroni are mentioned but never shown, which can lead to the old, wait, who's the guy with the rat maze on his head again? Yes, bewildering as it sounds, I don't have much to complain about without getting into subjective nitpicky territory, like how I would have liked them to give Gordon a little more to do. Don't get me wrong, he's in it for a lot of the movie, and Jeffrey Wright plays him right, but he never got his moment, you know? Gordon's a badass, he needs to do badass things. If you're familiar with the Arkham games, this very closely resembles Arkham Origins, a grossly underrated entry in the series. Batman has been around for a while, people know of him, but he's yet to build that all-important good faith with Gotham's citizens or most of the GCPD. Bruce is reckless and doesn't seem to care about his family legacy, and Alfred berates him for it. He's also specifically being targeted by a madman. The comparisons are endless. By the way, this film sure made me want to replay the whole series again. Anyway, between this and Joker, WB seems to have finally found its stride by laying off the shared universe universe shtick and focusing more on making actual good standalone films. Who knew that not copying the competition and being original was the way to go? Except literally all of us. So who is this movie not for? Well, if you're extremely squeamish, have a short attention span, a bladder the size of my enthusiasm, and aren't invested in the Batman character, then this movie's not for you. Although who the fuck doesn't know Batman? I can ask 57-year-old Usutu from the Ndebele tribe, and chances are he's heard of Batman. Put Batman on the title of any movie and you'll fill seats. All you have to do really is not fuck it up, so I guess I'm here to tell you that they didn't fuck it up. And if you don't go see it, you're probably fucking up. Or part of a shittier tribe. Please don't hang that on the wall.